On Sunday nights, Ed Sullivan would smile for millions of viewers. On the other hand, he lost it in 1955. When a teenage musician made a single tweak to a tune, Sullivan lost it and spoke words that onlookers couldn't believe. He ruined his impeccable reputation by using a racial slur. There was a near-physical altercation. The staff had to separate them. Nobody brought it up for decades. The artist was stonewalled indefinitely. What he accomplished that night on live TV, though, altered the course of rock and roll forever. As a set of identical twins, Ed Sullivan entered this world in Harlem, New York on September 28, 1901. Daniel, his twin brother, had a low birth weight and didn't make it past his first few months. Because he was the only surviving twin, Ed had to deal with the weight of his loss throughout his formative years. A calm melancholy and emptiness molded him even as a youngster. His large family was passed down through his Irish parents, Peter and Elizabeth. Only 5 of Ed's 8 siblings made it past childhood. He was the third. Life and sorrow coexisted in the house. Ed was only 5 years old when yet another tragedy struck. The loss of his little sister devastated the family once again. The agony became intolerable for Elizabeth. She made the decision to uproot their lives and relocate to the northern New York village of Portchester from Harlem. Peaceful and tranquility reigned in Portchester. Ed's parents thought the transition would help them move on, but he never got over his losses. Ed learned to accept and even embrace his unhappiness at an early age. People frequently referred to Ed as the miracle child since he managed to survive despite all of this. He was born into a mixed-race neighborhood and spent his formative years immersed in the music and traditions of his many neighbors. Ed observed the transition from horse-drawn carriages to cars. Only 5 of his 8 siblings survived past childhood. Life was a constant reminder of how precarious it was. Particularly his mother, he felt the embrace of his parents. He was their savior, in their eyes. There was always music to deal with the sadness that lingered in the house. As they sang harmoniously around the piano, the Sullivans filled the halls with their music. They found solace in music. For the rest of his life, Ed would carry this habit. He would think back to those early days, when a song could make heavy things feel lighter, even as a popular TV host. Ed also started to display his thirst for dominance as he matured. He had great athletic success while he was a high school student. He was named to 12 sports teams between 1916 and 1919. He had a reputation as a tenacious halfback in football. A swift point guard plays basketball. A lightning-fast sprinter on the track. But as a baseball catcher and captain, he was at his best. Over time, these athletic pursuits molded him. They taught him self-control and leadership skills. On top of that, he thoroughly enjoyed taking the lead. While playing baseball, Ed was captain and was responsible for directing his teammates. Both his reputation and the number of championships he won increased. He gained a feeling of authority in that position, which would be crucial later on in his career. Ed escaped to Chicago at the age of 17 in an attempt to enlist in the Navy when the United States entered World War I. Nevertheless, he was returned home due to his youth and lack of documentation. His daring was on display in that disastrous endeavor. It also caused him to change his course. Also at that point, Ed had stumbled into writing. While he was a student, he edited the school newspaper and contributed to sports pieces. He was employed by the Portchester Daily Item immediately upon his graduation. Ed savored every single one of the $1 articles he was paid for. It was the first step in his career as a journalist, which would lead him to work for the Hartford Post, the Evening Mail, the Associated Press, and, finally, the Evening Graphic in New York. His lifelong interests in writing and sports had prepared him for a greater challenge. Ed also learned about justice through sports. He didn't give it much thought when he was a kid because he played sports with black teammates. He was unaffected by it. He never found it unusual when he went to Connecticut to watch sports and encountered teams that had black players. He never lost sight of that egalitarian principle. Even when other presenters refused to feature black performers, Ed Sullivan would do it on his own television show. For Ed Sullivan, taking a job at the Hartford Post in 1919 seemed like a huge leap forward in his career. He was hoping for better possibilities at a bigger paper after leaving the Portchester Daily Item. That strategy, however, quickly collapsed. Before he could even have a feel for the workplace, he was out of a job when the Hartford Post went bankrupt in his first week there. A odd and unfortunate setback that was. This is particularly true given the heyday of newspapers back then. After a few days, most papers don't close their doors. After learning that the newspaper industry was notoriously unstable, Sullivan had to start the job search process over from the beginning. This, however, had little effect on his speed. On the contrary, it just served to strengthen his resolve to press on. His early ambition and resilience were shaped by that swift and hard lesson. Sullivan picked himself up after the Hartford Post went under and took a job as a sports reporter for the New York Evening Mail. Yet another newspaper went out of business in 1923. This was the beginning of a difficult time during which he went from failing newspaper to failing newspaper. He worked for several newspapers between 1923 and 1927, including the Morning World, the Associated Press, the Morning Telegraph, the New York Bulletin, and the Leader. He had to hunt for a new job every time a newspaper folded. Most people would have given up on this difficult cycle. Sullivan was unyielding in his pursuit. He saw every position as an opportunity to learn new things and expand his professional network. Despite the uncertainty and exhaustion, it revealed his genuine love for journalism. Those years spent working for the Associated Press were crucial. Among the world's most illustrious news organizations, the AP stood tall. Sullivan continued to freelance for publications such as the Morning Telegraph and the Philadelphia Bulletin, but it was his employment with the AP that brought him national stories and increasingly substantial projects. Sullivan gained experience reporting on a wide range of topics, from athletics to breaking news, during this time, which ended in 1927. Despite being in the midst of multiple career changes, he established himself as a reliable storyteller and adaptable individual. He had established himself as a competent journalist by the time he departed from the AP. Sullivan made a significant move that same year. As a sports writer, he became a member of the New York Evening Graphic in 1927. With a penchant for daring and frequently controversial reporting, the Graphic was ostentatious and noisy. As a result, Sullivan rose swiftly through the ranks. His first permanent leadership position came soon after, as sports editor. He also met Walter Winchell, a prominent gossip columnist at the period, at the Graphic. Sullivan took over as the Broadway columnist for the newspaper after Winchell departed for the Daily Mirror in 1929. He gained access to the entertainment industry and a new type of influence through that column. Sullivan was already well known when the firm dissolved in 1932. He started writing about Broadway for the New York Daily News in 1932. His now famous column, Little Old New York, first appeared around that time. People looked at it daily for 42 years, till 1974. The performances, actors, and private lives of Broadway's A-listers were the subjects of Sullivan's writings. His voice was well liked by many for being honest, crisp, and immersed in the action at all times. Someone may become famous overnight with only one mention from Sullivan. Even those outside of New York City could follow the drama thanks to his syndicated column. As the entertainment industry changed every year, Sullivan changed with it. He remained at the top because of that. A talent spotter, Sullivan had other talents as well. The little city of New York was about more than only rumors. A lot of up-and-coming performers and actors got their starts there. Sullivan was the first to notice talent. His column has the power to launch careers with just one encouraging remark. Conversely, his reputation might be ruined with a single statement if he disliked someone. Mornings were spent reading his column by actors and producers who knew that a single sentence may determine the fate of their show. As a news reporter, Sullivan wasn't doing just that. His hand was molding it. At every major event, including parties and theater openings, you might spot him outside the newspaper offices. Sullivan was always present whenever anything occurred. New York's nightlife, however, was a separate battlefield in and of itself. Sullivan established his business at the world-renowned El Morocco Club. His de facto base of operations was that. At the Stork Club, his adversary Walter Winchell was in session across town. There, the two men battled for the attention of the A-listers and politicians that frequented the nightlife. There was a contest for every renowned face that came through the doors. Winchell's Stork Club was well known for its select clientele and stringent admissions process. Power and glitz were hallmarks of Sullivan's El Morocco. Their competition was palpable, as the two columnists controlled the nightlife of New York City. There was a lot of buzz about it throughout the city. Presence at either club has the power to shape one's reputation. Sullivan wasn't content to merely write. He, too, had planned to dominate radio, just like Winchell. His debut radio program, CBS's The Ed Sullivan Show, premiered in 1932. He gained new fans and famous guests, such as George M. Cohan and Jack Benny, from that show. Through 1941's Ed Sullivan Variety, 1943-1944's Ed Sullivan Entertains, and 1946's Ed Sullivan's Pipelines, Sullivan persisted in hosting television shows. His fame spread to more households with each episode. He thrived on the radio. More people could hear his celebrity rumors, and he could disseminate them faster. Since he was a familiar voice, people started to trust him. He demonstrated his versatility beyond writing through radio. A bold move was made by CBS in 1948. Toast of the Town, a new variety show airing on Sunday nights, was hosted by Ed Sullivan. Without any background in television, Sullivan wrote columns for newspapers. A CBS executive named Marlo Lewis thought Sullivan's no-nonsense approach could be effective. Sullivan had doubts. "I have already accomplished all of their stated goals." A joke was made by him. With a meager budget of $17.75, the inaugural program premiered on June 20, 1948. The appearance fees were as low as $200, even for Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. Fear gripped the sponsors. William Paley, head of CBS, had faith in him, despite executives' concerns that he wasn't showy enough. Over the course of the show's more than 20 years of prominence, Sullivan battled for the opportunity to host A-listers. A lot of suffering was necessary for that result. Many of his critics despised him. They were horrified by his ungainly delivery. According to what Harriet Van Horn wrote, he was completely uninteresting. Others felt he was hopeless, ungainly, and stiff. Sullivan felt hurt by it. Even sent a brief, unpleasant letter to Van Horn once. Yet those back home persisted in keeping tabs. Sullivan was ridiculed for doing nothing even by Alan King. Even though they were the best at it. Being able to take it was something Sullivan mastered. He allowed stand-up comedians to play him. His fame skyrocketed as a result. People liked his performances because he could make them laugh. People continued tuning in despite the sneers from detractors. Sullivan's eccentric flair became synonymous with the show. He seems nervous while filmed. No matter what, he slouched constantly. Narrowed was his voice. He may have had Bell's palsy, according to others. His grin was like a lemon being squeezed, according to Time magazine. He was perfectly healthy, though. His bravery was lauded by numerous others who wrote to him. His wooden movements were imitated by comedians. That contributed to his rise to fame. Sullivan always accepted this portrayal. Actually, he welcomed it. He became one of the most beloved people in entertainment due to his honesty and humor. The program found a new home in 1953. Located at 1697 Broadway, is CBS Studio 50. Constructed in 1927, the theater was somewhat old. There was stained glass and a Gothic roof inside, making it look majestic. Stowing cameras and equipment inside required some effort. It was necessary to conceal even the next subway so it wouldn't interfere. This theater was Sullivan's favorite. The Ed Sullivan Theater was rechristened by CBS in 1967 to commemorate the show's 20th anniversary on television. An accolade like that rarely comes to a TV celebrity. You can still see that theater standing tall now. It would later be the home of Stephen Colbert and David Letterman. Sullivan and the other famous performers that appeared there are what most people remember it for, though. Toast of the Town was the original name for the program. Sullivan felt that this did not adequately acknowledge him. Many viewers had previously identified it as his program. Rebranded as The Ed Sullivan Show on September 25, 1955, by CBS. Sullivan was concerned about that. It solidified his status as a dominant figure in television. Elvis Presley would be featured by him a year down the road. 60 million people tuned in to see Elvis. Considering the time, that was a television record. With his new moniker and the massive crowd, Sullivan was forever famous. On the other hand, Sullivan could be a pain at times. Bo Diddley was hiding out in the wings on November 20, 1955. His rendition of 16 Tons, a smash hit by Tennessee Ernie Ford, was heard by Sullivan. In the space of 3 weeks, that song had sold more than 1 million copies. According to Sullivan, Diddley should play it. Diddley likely thought it would be good for his career, so he consented. He mistakenly believed he was supposed to perform both when he spotted cue cards indicating Bo Diddley's 16 Tons. Instead, he played Bo Diddley, his own tune, on the air. With that decision came one of the most defiant episodes of the early days of television. A portion featuring R&B included Diddley. His own hits sent the audience into a frenzy. It infuriated Sullivan. A lasting impression was left by Diddley's unfiltered enthusiasm and renowned beat. For the first time, a lot of Americans heard that catchy Bo Diddley beat. The music industry would never be the same after those 2 minutes. Sullivan became enraged as soon as the cameras ceased rolling. A furious fit of anger broke out between him and Diddley. Diddley and eyewitnesses claim that Sullivan went so far as to accuse him of being the first black lad to ever betray him. What a really offensive racial comment. Here, Sullivan's bigotry and rage were on display, despite his history of fighting for black artists. Fights sprang up. Employees had to push them back. It was almost a brawl when the argument escalated. Sullivan made Diddley want to smack him. Diddley's boss made an effort to reassure him. The management cautioned that it was Ed Sullivan. Nothing concerned Diddley. Sullivan assured him that he would never return to television work. After 6 months, Sullivan finally snapped at you. Diddley was forbidden from coming back. On television, Ed Sullivan was beloved by millions. His daughter Betty, meanwhile, has stated an entirely different version of events. She added that her dad's infamously short fuse may burst at the slightest provocation. In the presence of others, Ed exuded an air of tranquility and charisma. Behind closed doors, he exploded in wrath. One time at home, Betty recounted, Ed became very angry and began yelling and banging doors after a minor argument. Members of his family learnt to be cautious when they were near him. His triggers were always a mystery. He rarely displayed this anger on screen. Underneath the well-known pleasant grin, it remained concealed. Yet, back at home, it seemed quite genuine. His loved ones had to deal with his erratic behavior on a daily basis. Betty went on to say that when the cameras weren't rolling, Ed was completely different from his public demeanor. His act gave the impression that he was gregarious and easygoing. Truthfully, he tended to keep to himself. He preferred his own company. It was common for him to retreat to his dressing room following a broadcast rather than celebrate or mingle with guests. He was quite content to sit quietly in his home for hours on end, reading the paper or watching TV. This state of mind persisted. It was just how he was. Even his co-workers occasionally mistook his outward demeanor for coldness or aloofness due to the glaring difference between his public persona as a pleasant host and his inner life as a loner. A more sinister aspect to his concerns during the peak of the Cold War was also there. In one of Betty's anecdotes, Ed was led to believe that her lover had communist sympathies. At a time when widespread communist terror gripped the United States, this event occurred in the late 1950s or early 1960s. Questions on the boy's background were asked by Ed of Betty. He thought of kicking him out of the house. He was so worried that his daughter was involved with a radical that he sought the opinions of others. It was a wild assumption with zero proof. No one could have escaped the era's anxiety, not even Ed Sullivan, who openly championed civil rights and hosted African American performers on his show. Similarly, Ed was a man who kept his feelings under wraps. Since Ed was reserved and hardly expressed his emotions, his grandson Rob took it upon himself to prepare. It was Rob's belief that Ed disguised his pain behind this emotional mask. Ed lost a sister at an early age and a twin brother when he was a baby. Because of these setbacks, he was cautious with his emotions. Stiffness never left his face, even as an adult. And restrained himself. This, according to Rob, was one reason why Ed came across as distant to outsiders and even certain members of his own family. A man with feelings he couldn't express lay beneath that icy veneer. It contributed to his personality and the way he dealt with the demands of stardom. Even in his interactions with performers, he could see that conflict between his public persona and his private actions. The Doors were scheduled to perform live on his show on September 17, 1967. Light My Fire had to have a lyric changed before they could perform it, according to the producers. They felt the word higher implied drug use, so they wanted it removed. The band members conveyed their desires to the producers during rehearsal by nodding and agreeing. After they departed, Jim Morrison made it clear to the others that they would not be making any changes. Despite their nerves, the rest of the band rallied behind him. "I thought they were kidding," guitarist Robbie Krieger remarked afterwards. "Fuck it," I yelled out. "All right, let's get down to business as usual." They resolved to stand firm. The show was live that night. Always with the same politeness, Ed introduced them. They began playing Light My Fire after playing one song. Photographs were taken. Lots of people were observing. And Morrison sang, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," right when it counted. Everyone in the audience thought it was great. There was a complete change in atmosphere backstage. Anger was felt by the producers. After the performance, Ed Sullivan himself dropped into their dressing room. According to those who were there, he became enraged and began cursing at them, accusing them of betraying the show's and the network's trust. The group was informed that they would not be performing again. No one had bothered the Doors. In response to the comment that they would never perform on the show again, Jim Morrison famously said, "But we just did," he murmured with an air of nonchalance. All the band's energy was captured in that one sentence. They had achieved their goal. They had been featured on a major American platform. And they had maintained their integrity. Interviews, documentaries, and films continue to bring that moment to life, even after all these years. There was an appearance by the Rolling Stones on The Ed Sullivan Show on January 15, 1967. Their new song, "Let's Spend the Night Together," was going to be performed. However, CBS and the show's producers felt the name was too sexually explicit for a family film. They threatened to cut the band short unless they changed the lyrics. The Rolling Stones caved in to the demands. Instead, they sung, "Let's Spend Time Together." Back then, it was huge. Due to the conservative nature of American television, the original lyrics were deemed too defiant. The Stones remained unsatisfied despite their agreement. People started talking about it. Rock music and the battle against television censorship were shown. Furthermore, it demonstrated the influence that television had on artists. Even radio stations got on board. The phrase "night" was either muted or not played at all by several of them. That hampered the song's popularity in the US. The United Kingdom, in contrast, couldn't care less. There was no censorship of the song. A defiant reputation for the Stones existed even back then. Their reputation for innovation preceded them. Sunday night's lip sync at the London Palladium only served to enhance their already stellar image. As one of the most well-known censorship conflicts in rock history, the Ed Sullivan moment stuck with everyone. Mick Jagger felt the need to express himself during the performance. In every performance of "Let's Spend Some Time Together," he made eye contact with the camera and groaned. Even though it was a little adjustment, many took note. The irony was palpable in the eye rolls. He was trying to convey that they were unhappy with the shift. Both the audience and the producers noticed it. One well-known method of subdued protest is the eye roll. In contrast to Jim Morrison of The Doors, who was banned for refusing to alter his lyrics, the Rolling Stones had consented to alter the lyrics. However, their determination was unwavering. It was clear from mix eye rolls that they could play by the rules while simultaneously making fun of them. It was widely believed that this was orchestrated. A lot of people assumed Mick was simply being himself. Regardless, it left an indelible impression. Those few seconds are still cited as a model of rule-abiding rebellion by bands even now. There was another well-known altercation with Ed Sullivan a few years prior to this. The show featured an appearance by comedian Jackie Mason in October 1964. Shortly after Mason began his performance, President Lyndon B. Johnson made an announcement live on television. Sullivan informed Mason that he had 2 minutes remaining when the broadcast resumed by holding up 2 fingers off screen. It all started with Mason making finger jokes. His finger pointing and "here's a finger for you" antics continued unabated. Sullivan mistook Mason's motion for an obscenity. Sullivan thought Mason was showing a middle finger with his thumb. It infuriated Sullivan. He terminated Mason's 6-show contract after the show. At the time, the deal was worth $45,000, which would be more than $450,000 now. Sullivan informed the media that Mason exhibited erratic behavior and was unwell. Mason vehemently denied ever being rude to Sullivan. But his claims were disbelieved. Sullivan was found not guilty in Mason's libel suit. The story was reported in every major media outlet. There was a major setback for Mason's career. Sullivan strutted his stuff. "We lost our jobs if we fought with him." The majority of television networks barred Mason. He didn't get well for about 20 years. The damage to Mason's reputation persisted even after Sullivan reinstated him on the program and offered an apology. His famous gaffes on live television are what people will remember him for. His producers saw him as too dangerous to cast. Mason had no choice but to perform minor parts at small clubs. Re-establishing his profession was a process that took years. The finger incident remained fresh in everyone's minds even at that late hour. Dealing with Sullivan was a real eye-opener. There was more to Sullivan than that. He served as a guardian. A career may be ruined if you went against him. When it came to who could appear on his show, Sullivan was equally picky. His rules were followed by many artists. Elvis Presley, as with all his other famous acts, had to film from waist up. For the most part, Sullivan got to decide what was appropriate. However, few anticipated his other side. He booked more black singers than other presenters of his day, despite his authoritarian and severe personality. Black American musicians, dancers, and singers were given a national platform by Sullivan beginning in 1948. During this period, segregation and racism were prevalent. He was instructed by several sponsors not to book them anymore. He was once instructed to stop by a Ford executive. Sullivan forcibly removed him from the theater. People should prioritize talent over intolerance, according to Sullivan. James Brown, The Supremes, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Sammy Davis Jr., and Sammy Davis Jr. were among the performers on his show. Leaders in the civil rights movement, such as Coretta Scott King, came as well. Real risks were taken by Sullivan. Because of such, he was beloved by many. Some people saw through his hypocrisy. He had a reputation behind the scenes for blacklisting artists like Bo Diddley who dared to disobey him. Contrary to popular belief, he actively promoted black talent on screen. He maintained the airing of his program. Its CBS run began on June 20, 1948, and ended on June 6, 1971. That's more than 1,000 episodes. Millions of American viewers tuned in each Sunday. Elvis Presley and the Beatles were among those that Sullivan introduced to them. Carol Burnett and Richard Pryor were among the comedians who appeared. On February 9, 1964, around 73 million individuals tuned in to see the Beatles perform. When that happened, it set a new record. The tight control that Sullivan exhibited was well known. Only Elvis's waist was exposed. As a result, the Rolling Stones revised their song lyrics. Still, Sullivan's show might be a career maker or a career ender for some. The 1971 cancellation by CBS marked the end of an era for the show. Following that, Sullivan's own life expectancy was quite low. Sylvia, his wife, passed away on March 16, 1973. After meeting in 1926, they were married since April 28, 1930. Because of their religious differences, she was Jewish and he was Catholic, they initially kept their romance under wraps. They went so far as to inform her relatives that Ed Sullivan was Sullivan's real name. Their 1930 elopement took place in City Hall. Elizabeth, their daughter, was born 8 months later. The Sullivans worked well together. After each performance, Sylvia would give Ed constructive criticism. In 1973, Mom passed away, and he was distraught. The diagnosis of esophageal cancer came to Sullivan 1 year after that. The truth may not have been told to him by his family. They were worried he would be too distressed. Shortly after, Sullivan departed. He passed away at the age of 73 on October 13, 1974. His funeral was placed at the Cathedral of St. Patrick. After seeing Sullivan, Paul McCartney remembered that he realized Sullivan had forgotten his identity. Around that time, Sullivan had undergone a remarkable transformation. Years down the road, Sullivan's daughter Betty and grandson Rob discussed his domineering personality. In 1952, Betty tied the knot with Bob Precht, who was the show's producer. She was intimately familiar with Ed's meticulous attention to detail. His obsession with detail made Sullivan renowned. It affected even his loved ones. Sullivan was both gentle and rough, according to Rob's anecdotes. Even while he adored his family, the father also prohibited musicians whose music made him angry. Most people thought this guy was simply a stiff TV personality, but these revelations exposed a different side of him. Sullivan exhibited a wide range of emotions, from warmth to rage. Only his loved ones knew this side of him, despite the fact that millions watched him on Sundays. And the effect lingered even after the cameras had stopped rolling.